How can a single soldier turn the tide against an entire army? During the Macedonian Wars, Rome faced a deadly enemy, Philip V of Macedon, heir to the military legacy of Alexander the Great, a commander trained to crush any opposition with his nearly impenetrable phalanx. For years, Roman legions clashed against this wall of spears, unable to break through. But everything changed when one man, a soldier history almost forgot, defied the very logic of war. His name? Spurius Ligustinus. He wasn't a celebrated general or a noble-born strategist. But in the chaos of battle, his courage, experience, and tactical brilliance helped shape a strategy that shattered the Macedonian army and paved the way for Rome's ultimate victory. Imagine being surrounded by thousands of warriors marching in perfect unison, a living wall of spears aimed at your chest, ready to crush anything in their path. The Macedonian phalanx seemed invincible. But what happens when a soldier sees beyond the formation and discovers its fatal flaw? The answer to that question didn't just decide the fate of Rome and Macedon. It changed the way wars were fought forever. And today, you're going to uncover how Spurius Ligustinus and Rome's tactical innovations brought down Philip V and destroyed the illusion of the phalanx's invincibility. In today's video, we'll break down how Rome adapted its legions to face and defeat the phalanx, and how Spurius Ligustinus played a crucial role in this tactical revolution. You'll see how one soldier helped rewrite Roman strategy against an enemy that seemed unstoppable. If you love learning how Rome crushed its greatest enemies with strategy and intelligence, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us bring you more incredible stories like this. And trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, get ready for a battle that changed the ancient world forever. For years, Rome struggled against an enemy that seemed invincible. The Macedonian phalanx, perfected over generations, was a war machine designed to crush anything in its path. Shielded by overlapping formations and bristling with long spears, it was a fortress of disciplined men moving as one. Roman commanders had tried countless tactics, but the legions failed to break through. Victory against Philip V of Macedon seemed impossible. Yet, while generals debated strategies, one veteran soldier saw what others missed. Not in grand maneuvers, but in the way the enemy moved on the battlefield. Spurius Ligustinus was not a famous general, nor was he born into nobility. He was a hardened veteran, forged through years of brutal combat. His experience told him that no formation, no matter how perfect, could withstand the unpredictable chaos of war. Unlike his superiors, who viewed the phalanx as an impenetrable wall, Ligustinus observed its weaknesses in motion. He saw how soldiers at the rear struggled to maintain cohesion, how uneven terrain disrupted their coordination, and how their rigid structure left them slow to react to sudden changes. The phalanx worked best in open fields, where its disciplined ranks could hold firm. But what if the battlefield didn't favor them? What if the Romans could control the flow of the fight, forcing Philip's army into terrain where their famous formation would start to crumble? Ligustinus knew that the answer wasn't brute force, it was adaptation. Instead of meeting the enemy head-on, the key was to expose the cracks in their seemingly perfect armor. But understanding a weakness and exploiting it are two very different things. How could the Romans turn a defensive flaw into an offensive strategy? And more importantly, could they do it before Philip realized what was happening? The power of the phalanx was also its greatest limitation. It relied on tight, disciplined ranks where every soldier moved in perfect synchronization. When marching in formation, it was nearly unstoppable, like a human battering ram smashing through anything in its path. But this strength came at a cost. Once disrupted, it was almost impossible to restore order. The longer spears of the Macedonians gave them reach, but only as long as they maintained a forward-facing assault. If the enemy forced them to pivot, react, or fight in multiple directions at once, the formation could break apart. Ligustinus recognized this fatal flaw and shared his insight with his commanders. Rather than charging into the spears, the Romans needed to attack from angles the phalanx wasn't built to handle. They had to disrupt its rhythm, force it to stretch and bend, and most importantly, make it fight on Rome's terms, not Macedonia's. This was easier said than done. The Macedonian army was still a disciplined force, and one mistake could lead to another disastrous defeat. To implement this plan, the Romans needed to rethink their own tactics. Instead of massive, unified charges, they began using smaller, more flexible units to harass the enemy. These units darted in and out, striking weak points, pulling the phalanx apart one section at a time. It wasn't about brute force. It was about breaking the enemy's control over the battlefield. The more disorganized the phalanx became, the less effective it was. But this alone wasn't enough. Ligustinus knew that disrupting the enemy was only part of the equation. The next step was even more daring, exploiting the gaps they created before Philip's forces could recover. How could the Romans deliver the decisive blow and turn disruption into total collapse? The Romans had done what once seemed impossible. They had forced the phalanx into disarray. But disorganization alone wouldn't win the war. A scattered enemy could still regroup, and Philip V was no fool. He knew that if he could stabilize his ranks, he could turn the tide. Ligustinus understood this too, and he knew that hesitation was the one thing Rome could not afford. They needed to strike before the Macedonians could recover. But how do you dismantle an enemy that is desperately trying to restore order? The answer lay in overwhelming pressure. Instead of giving the Macedonians time to reset, the Romans intensified their attacks. The flexible manipular formations, which had struggled against the phalanx in the past, were now their greatest advantage. Roman units swarmed the weak points in Philip's line, cutting down exposed soldiers and widening the gaps in his formation. Every opening became an opportunity, every hesitation a death sentence for the enemy. Ligustinus, leading from the front, pushed his men forward, ensuring that once the phalanx started breaking, it would never recover. What made this strategy so devastating wasn't just its effectiveness. It was the psychological toll it took on the Macedonian soldiers. For years, they had relied on their formation as a shield, a structure that made them invincible. Now, that very structure was turning against them. Isolated units found themselves surrounded, their famous long spears useless in close combat. Panic set in, and as fear spread through the ranks, the once mighty army of Philip V began to crumble. But one final question remained. What would this battle mean for the future of warfare? If the legendary phalanx could fall, what else could be redefined? The fall of Philip V was more than just another Roman victory. It was the end of an era. For centuries, the phalanx had dominated the battlefield, but its defeat proved that war was no longer about rigid formations and brute strength. Adaptability, mobility, and strategic flexibility were the new keys to victory. The Romans had learned to evolve, and in doing so, they had rewritten the rules of war. Spurius Ligustinus may not have been a famous general, but his understanding of battle was revolutionary. His ability to see beyond the traditional methods of warfare and recognize the weaknesses in the enemy's strategy helped shape the Roman approach to combat for generations. His tactics didn't just defeat Macedonia. They influenced how Rome would fight its future wars, from Hannibal's cunning strategies to the campaigns that would eventually expand the empire across Europe. But if Rome had proven that no formation was invincible, it also meant that their own tactics would one day be challenged. No empire remains unchallenged forever. The same principles that led to Macedonia's downfall, the exposure of weaknesses, the ability to adapt, could one day be used against Rome itself. Victory had been secured, but had the Romans unknowingly set the stage for their own future defeats? If the strongest military formations in history could fall, what other great powers were destined to follow? And more importantly, who would be the next to adapt and change the course of history? Rome had rewritten the rules of war, but was it truly invincible? The same adaptability that crushed the Macedonian phalanx would one day be tested against even greater challenges. No army remains unbeatable forever, except perhaps Caesar's legendary 10th Legion. Discover how this unstoppable force achieved the impossible at Alesia, defying all odds with discipline, strategy, and unwavering loyalty to their commander. Could their tactics hold the key to Rome's ultimate survival? Click now to uncover the story of the 10th Legion and witness the battle that changed history.